What happens when one man tries to watch all the horror films of the 1980s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 80s Project. I gotta tell you, this is probably going to be the weirdest episode of the 80s Project to date. You see, 1985 is when video stores were in full swing, and there was a lot of direct-to-video product being kind of just put out there, and a lot of it was very obscure and lesser known. And I thought that we'd dedicate this entire episode to films that really don't have much of a known release date and are, a little on the weirder side of things. Our trip into the obscure starts with one with a completely unknown date, just having a release at some point in 85, and it's Victims! With an exclamation point, so make sure you pronounce that. It begins with a woman getting an axe in the head, and another getting cleavered while nude in bed, and another stabbed by a man dressed up as an old lady. But then there's a robbery, and this couple going for a ride out in the middle of nowhere, and they stop over to have some fun. But those robbers are out there too, and they kill the guy and assault the woman. We then meet a group of young ladies that are going on a trip together, but on their travels they cross paths with those two robbers. While they're out there in the desert, they encounter some other creeps as well, but then they set out exploring the desert rocks in bikinis. They soon realize that they're being watched, and trouble is compounded by a rock slide, and those robbers appear and take them captive. They assault them, or I think this guy does, even though it's clear he never takes his pants off, and there's even a bit of a backstory for the thug guy, I guess to give some understanding as to why he's doing all of this, but one of them manages to get the upper hand, and then it's up to the women to escape and not just be victims with an exclamation point. And wait a minute, what does any of this have to do with the murders in the beginning? Or the purse snatcher in drag? I guess nothing, because it's literally never mentioned in the film again. And I suppose there was just some extra bits shot that they decided to use, even though they didn't fit the rest of the narrative. Now, this was directed and co-written by Jeff Hathcock, and it was his first film. And over about 40 years, he'd only done about 8 movies, and one of them is the Troma classic Fertilize the Blaspheming Bombshell. There's no one in this film that you'd recognize, but the more Weasley-looking robber would go on to a bigger career where you don't see his face, since he played Lord Zed on the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. The weirdest bit is the ending, since it seems to reach a finale, but then has this extended bit with the women having to explain to the cops that they weren't involved with the robbers. And this one's kind of a drag, so it's a 2. There's a sleazy side to it that's interesting, but there's so little story to it. Weirdly, that montage of violence in the opening is the most exciting part of it. The horror cultural significance is just a 1, since it's not at all known, and there's no one you'll recognize here. Should you watch it? You can likely pass on this one, with an exclamation point.
Shut up, you bastard!
This next one is interesting with the dates because it's mostly listed as a 1988 movie, but it seems to have been released in Sweden in 85, and it's Mask of Murder. Like Victims, this also starts right away with several random scenes of people being killed, here by a person in an old mask. I presume a mask of murder. He takes it off right away though, and it's just a random dude, and then we have a little get-together where they're celebrating the birthday of Saruman. And they're a group of police officers investigating the murders, and McClane's wife is Miss Tessmacher. And they think that they have the killer pinned down in a building and go to talk to him, but he opens fire, shooting the chief. They shoot him back and kill him, but then McClane has taken a hold of the mask. But what's this? Seems like Marianne is having an affair with Bob's partner, and he's fully aware since he's watching through binoculars. Right afterwards though, someone in that mask is killing again, and Bob has to solve the case with Ray while knowing that he's boning his wife, and it seems like it's his goal to pin it on Ray. There's a kinda cool moment where he kills a woman, and as he's leaving, he's taking his mask off and just strolls past the woman's kid, who is looking for his mother, although she's dead in the other room. But we're never quite clear that Bob's doing the murders, although it sure seems like it. And this was a joint production between Sweden and Canada, and was directed by Arne Mattsson, who had been directing Swedish films since 1944, and made this one at around 65 years old, and he'd only do 3 more after this one. He had made a film in 1958 called Mannequin in Red that some considered to be a proto-giallo, and this was dipping back into that realm as well. If you're excited about the idea of Christopher Lee being in this one, don't get too hyped, because he's only in about 5 minutes total and spends the majority of the film in a hospital bed. And this is fairly dull, but it's not too bad, so I'll go 2.5 on it. It nails the tone and has some good moments happening, but the mystery just isn't a mystery, and I'm not sure why the movie is acting like we don't know exactly what's going on. The HCS is just a 1.5 since it's very obscure and never talked about, but it does have the great Christopher Lee in it, so that's worth at least an extra 0.5. Should you watch it? If you're a Lee fan, maybe, but it's okay to pass this by.
He didn't have a hat on. You know, he was shaved. All over his head. He was white, just like a billiard ball.
This next one also has no clear release date, with it just being known to have come out sometime in '85, and it's Bits and Pieces. It begins at a male strip club, that I wish was called Bits and Pieces, and Tanya and Rosie are watching, but then head home, splitting up. Tanya is followed by an unknown man who knocks her out and then takes her back to his place. There, we find out that his name is Arthur, and he has a mannequin that he refers to as Mother, like some sort of Norman Bates, and he ties Tanya to a big slab and kills her. Seems like she's just the latest in a string of murders, and she's the 7th victim, and Arthur realizes that Rosie might have seen him and fears being caught. Meanwhile, Arthur seems to really be into that strip club and goes back there only to knock out another woman in the exact same way. Since it's important for Arthur to have a backstory, I guess, we get a flashback where we find out that his mother was a hooker, and her John decides to put him in a wig and makeup, and as you know, that instantly makes you a murderer, and cut up girls with a power saw. The cops are quite upset that they can't catch the killer because for some reason they can't put together that all of the murders seem to happen to women leaving this one club, and we discover that our guy has also killed his mother. So, Rosie finds out that her friend is dead, so she goes to the cops. And I guess he figures that the best way to help her out is to ask her out on a date and take her to the beach, because that seems real professional. But Arthur's still on the hunt for her, even if he gets a little sidetracked on the way. Okay, this was directed by Leland Thomas, and this was the only film that he was involved with the exception of serving as a producer and cinematographer for a documentary in 2016. And there's a slight possibility that IMDb may have confused 2 different Leland Thomases. If it looks lower quality than some of the others, that's because it is, but it's not shot on video and instead is 16mm film, a lower grade format. Jennifer in this film is played by an actress named Tally Chanel. She was in a number of low-budget films in the late 80s and early 90s, but her big claim to fame was being Johnny Depp's girlfriend right after he and Winona Ryder broke it off. And this is unconfirmed, but an IMDb user said in a review that Thomas had retired from the industry but worked as a film teacher and said that he would show Bits and Pieces in the class as an example of how not to make a movie. And this is a 1.5. It's duller than usual and feels like a really low-rate Psycho clone without any of the things that made Psycho great or even enjoyable. The HCS is another one since it's, again, not talked about at all and barely got a release, only to vanish completely right afterwards. Should you watch it? Nah, these pieces aren't worth picking up.
Watch where you're going, apple ass.
Continuing on with our streak of films that don't have set release dates, here's one that was a made-for-TV movie, although it's not clear what TV, and it's Blue Murder, otherwise known as the Porno Murders. It begins poolside as an unseen person points a gun through a fence and shoots, and then that person shows up in someone's personal theater and kills everyone while wearing a clown mask. We then meet Dan Blake, and he gets a mysterious phone call from the killer, and he says that the people he murdered were judged for their sins, and says that he wants Blake to write a newspaper article condemning the victims for their dirty ways. Turns out that everyone that he killed was in the adult industry, and Blake decides he wants to find out more, even if the police tell him to let them do their jobs. But he ends up working along with Lieutenant Rossi, and there's more killings, including one with a bomb, and that killer keeps calling to taunt them. But then we see that he's working with the head of a big TV company and is eliminating competition. And at one point, Blake has a meeting with Rossi while he's taking a bath. So far in this block, we have a cop that asks one of the people to come to him for help out on a date, and another one that's holding meetings in his tub. Things get more intense when the town starts to get nervous about adult content and tell a French art film director that they won't carry his film for fear that it might be seen as pornography and a target for the killer. Blake then follows the trail, which means that he just goes from person to person to ask about stuff, and he tries to solve the porno murders. This one was by Charlie Wiener, and it was his directorial debut, but he'd only do a couple of movies after this one. I should point out that the actor who plays Dan Blake is named Jamie Spears, the same name as the father of one Britney Spears, but I couldn't find any official confirmation out there to say if this actually is him or another actor that had the same name. Like, several sites online cite it as actually being him, but his own online information doesn't mention the film, which I don't blame him for. But there's pictures of him out there, and I'm not sure it's him. So I personally believe it's just a different Jamie Spears. And this movie's also fairly bleh. It's another 2. It has some unintentional comedy, which makes part of it fun, but overall, it's just a bunch of people talking in rooms, and since it was meant for TV, there's no violence or nudity, which makes a movie about the adult industry seem super tame. The significance is another 1, since this is another one that no one knows about, and with no one of any note, unless I guess that really is Britney Spears' dad. Should you watch it? Nah, go watch a regular porno instead.
Now before you leave, pass me some more of that bubble bath soap, will you?
Continuing on with this next one, again, having only a known date of sometime in '85, and this is a peculiar entry with Fright Show, otherwise known as Cinemagic. And as it opens, it's this fireball streaking towards, well, yeah, that didn't age well. We then have these two guys from Starlog magazine, which was the premier science fiction magazine back in the 80s and ran from 1976 all the way until 2009. But in the 80s, it was the sci-fi equivalent to Fangoria. They tell us that we're going to see 4 films, and they say science fiction films, but as you'll see, they're clearly more horror. The first is called Dr. Dobermind, which has a kid strolling through a museum and sees a tour group that stops and watches a man named Dr. Dobermind dissect an animal. Jenny is freaked out, and after the field trip is over, she sees him everywhere, even at Haagen-Dazs.
We have vanilla. We have no other flavors. Only vanilla.
This may seem like a spooky scene, but this is really how they were at the Dazs back then. Later, at home, she sees a severed hand in her kick-ass nightstand drawer lined with Hulk comic panels, which I want. But then she starts seeing body parts all around her. But is it all in her head, or is she being stalked by Doc Dobermind? The second segment is called Illegal Alien and starts with a nose ship called the Nostrilamo. Get it? And that's what this one is, just a broad parody of Alien with jokes, like them shooting a roach with a laser gun. And that's pretty much all it is, just an Alien pastiche. It's not funny at all, and entirely hinges around the idea that the alien is an illegal alien, so it's Hispanic, which is a joke that probably could be funny if delivered right. But guess what? Not here. Segment 3 is called Night Fright, which has this little kid named Zach getting kicked out of the horror club, and that night he hears something in his room, and it turns out that there really is a monster in his closet. And the final story is called The Thing in the Basement, which is a tribute to classic 50s B movies where these poker players have to deal with a rogue meteor. So, what is this? Well, it was made in conjunction with Starlog magazine, and they had a spin-off magazine called Cinemagic. They held a contest where people would send in their short films and they'd be judged, and the 4 best would make it onto the movie, and they had a bunch of entries. It should be noted that the director of Dr. Dobermind was none other than Jonathan Mostow, future director of Terminator 3 and Breakdown. And even wilder, the sound for his segment was done by Reginald Hudlin. And I know that he produced and directed much bigger things, but to me, he's the director of House Party. Seems like it was meant to just be called Cinemagic, but they wanted to punch up the title for a VHS release, and it was then given the title Fright Show, although it remained obscure. And it's mostly fun. I'll give it a 3. There's definitely homemade charm going on here, even if some of them are more successful than others, but I got a kick out of about 75% of these shorts. The significance is yet another one since it's not talked about at all, and sure, it was the launch pad for Mostow, but it's not how he made his name or anything. Should you watch it? I'd say yes. It's kind of fun to see some homemade shorts from the mid-80s.
What was down there?
I don't know, but it's not of this earth.
We're going to get a little bit more focused with our release dates now, since this one is at least known to have come out in May, although the day isn't sure. But now, let's consult the Oracle. We've got this old lady with a sort of remote writing version of a Ouija, which we then see getting boxed up in a crate. Seems like the old lady has died, and one of the guys clearing her place out takes her stuff and stores it in the basement of a building he works at. Jennifer is down there and finds the hand thing and is told that the lady has just vanished, and Jennifer is now living in her apartment. Then, we're on the streets as a prostitute picks up a guy who turns out to be a woman who kills her. She says her name is Farkas, and she's waiting for someone, maybe Scud. Back at Jennifer's house, she's having a little party with friends and breaks out the hand, and it starts to do its thing, spelling out, "Help me." Later on, it starts writing again, this time on its own. This time just saying the name William Graham and a phone number. They call it only to find that Mr. Graham committed suicide 3 weeks ago. But then strange stuff starts happening all over the apartment, with things flying around. And then imaginary little monsters that cause Mr. Pappas to stab himself. But then, when Jennifer uses the device again, she gets a little vision that shows her that William Graham didn't exactly kill himself and was murdered by Farkas and some other guy. So she starts to do a little investigating to determine what's going on. But that involves possessions, murder attempts, deadly elevators, and creatures pulling people's heads off. Okay, this one is from the Queen of Sleaze, Roberta Findlay. And this is her first appearance on the project, although I could swear she already had one on here, but I guess not. She was a big player in the adult industry at the time, and had either written, directed, or produced a whole slew of X-rated films. And this was her first mainstream film of the 80s. She had wanted to use an actual Ouija board for the film, but at this time, Parker Brothers had the rights to it, so she had to come up with the idea of a spirit hand for the film. Also, the role of Farkas was originally meant to be a man, but when Pamela Testa showed up for the audition with her boyfriend, she ended up getting the role instead, and I wonder how her boyfriend felt about that. It looks like this one went straight to video where it didn't make too much of an impact. And I like this one, so it's a 3. It's a bit all over the place, but it's certainly not dull, and it has enough interesting stuff going on to keep your attention. Not a great flick, but a decent one. The HCS is just a 1 since it's not much known and isn't even one of Findlay's more noted films and just doesn't feature any familiar faces. Should you watch it? Yeah, it's a weird one, but a solid ride.
I killed you once, I'll kill you again!
It's time for our second one that came out in May, but on an undetermined date in it, and now let's go join up with Blood Cult. It begins in a sorority house as a young lady takes a shower and she's attacked by someone with a meat cleaver. And everything is done with this fisheye lens, I guess because the bathroom was small, so they needed as wide a shot as possible, and he kills her, psycho style. We then have a text crawl telling us there's a bunch of killings and that the sheriff is on the case, and that this is that story. Next, we have another college girl in her bed, and she's attacked by a guy who looks to be wearing a black leather jacket, and beats her to death with the severed head of another girl. Weirdly, the cops come in and talk to each other, but instead of hearing what they're saying, they lay a voiceover on top of it with the sheriff explaining what they were talking about.
That wasn't like the Doc I knew then, but I didn't know then what I do now.
The killer leaves little amulets behind at the murder sites, and it's the insignia of an obscure cult. And we're told that by a librarian that stumbles over her lines around 3 times. But who needs another take, right?
It seems they started out as a backlash against the witch trials in Salem. That's from Massachusetts.
The librarian is his daughter as well and tells him that the killer is collecting body parts to make a complete body. So you could say he's collecting pieces of them. Ron goes to the dean of the college and they decide to keep the campus open, and his main concern is catching the killer soon, so he doesn't blow his chances with an upcoming election. So you know, hero stuff. But the murders continue, and Ron follows some leads that head out towards the woods with concerns of things going on at night. And Tina's boyfriend shows an interest in what's happening and wants to tag along. But can the sheriff get elected before he falls prey to the blood cult? This one here was directed by Christopher Lewis, and it was his directorial debut, but we're going to see him again in the near future. And his parents were both in the industry. His father was a producer named Tom Lewis, and his mother was the actress Loretta Young. He also had some controversy early in his career when he was indicted for being involved with a company that produced child pornography, but it appears as if he didn't serve any prison time and maintained his innocence. This movie was made for a mere $27,000 and it was billed as being the first shot on video horror film. It got some notoriety for that, although it was not accurate since both Boarding House and Sledgehammer were released before it. It's also said that they spent $100K on the film's promotion and advertising, far more than the actual budget itself. It got a fair amount of publicity, but it's hard to say how well it did, but it managed to get a modest amount of notoriety. And this is a 2.5. It's fine and all, but just feels like a run-of-the-mill slasher cult flick, and its lack of budget is too evident. The HCS is also a 1.5 since it's yet another one that's left no impact at all and was mostly ignored, but since it got a touch of notoriety for claiming to be the first shot on video horror film, I'll give it an extra 0.5. Should you watch it? Probably not, but it's not too painful.
I love you too. Bye.
It's time to wrap up this collection of misfits with our final film that just has an unknown release date in May, and it's Future Kill. We get these 2 dudes all done up in Road Warrior gear, and they talk about the movement. And this guy says that he's non-violent, but the other guy's name is Splatter, and he likes enforcing the rules in the most violent way possible, so they butt heads. We're then at a frat party, and this group of guys are in trouble for some prank they pulled and want to make up for it. So their rivals want them to humiliate themselves. We find out that the punk characters are referred to as mutants, and they're anti-nuke protesters. And they get some news coverage. And one of the frat guys appears to be Jim Carrey before Jim Carrey was a thing.
Down, boy.
Down.
So part of their apology requires dressing up as mutants and going down to the protest, and they have to kidnap one of the mutants. After driving around for what seems like a long time, they choose Eddie, that pacifist leader, to kidnap. However, when they try, Splatter is there, and he refers to one of them as a Zod, which I think is short for Izod because of his shirt, and kills a couple of people, including Eddie. But Splatter tells the rest of the crew that the frats were responsible, so they give chase. Now, I didn't mention this before, but Splatter is played by Edwin Neal, otherwise known as the hitchhiker from the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and he goes to see another mutant named Dorothy Grimm, and she's played by Marilyn Burns, so we have a little reunion going on here. The mutants sabotage their car, so the Zods are now trapped downtown with no way out, being hunted at all turns. But can they make it out before they end up being splattered? So this one had a good amount of recognition, and it was directed by Ronald W. Moore, and it's the only film he directed, but he'd later act as a producer on a couple of others. He co-wrote the script, but so did Edwin Neal, and the original title was simply Splatter. But then when Splatter University came out, they altered it to avoid confusion. They got funding based on the involvement of Neal and Burns and the ability to market it as a connection to TCM, but then it became known for something else entirely. The poster art by H.R. Giger. And there's some dispute over how he became involved with the project, since Neal claims that he approached him at a convention, but Giger says that he dealt with Moore. His story is that Moore came to him in tears and was panicked that the film was going to lose financing, but would be able to keep it if Giger did a poster for it. But since Neal owns the original artwork as well as some other prints of his, it seems like his story might be the more probable one. Any case, that poster art helped land it on a number of video store shelves, and even though it was never a big name, it became a more recognized title. I guess in order to capitalize on that poster, in the UK, this went by the title Night of the Alien, which is hilarious considering there's not a single alien to be found. And this is fine, so it's also a 2.5. It has some things I like about it, and it's a decent premise, even if it's just the Warriors again, but on a lower scale. But it's watchable. The HCS is a 2 since it has a pair of genre legends in it, and that Giger poster that's rather recognizable even if the movie just hasn't been seen. Should you watch it? It's maybe worth a watch through, but you likely won't be too impressed. So there you have it, a batch of the more, I guess, obscure, weird entries of 1985. There's definitely going to be some more of these, but probably a little bit more mixed in with some known entries, but I thought a whole block of some of these more oddball films would be kind of interesting. But my favorite of this one was The Oracle. Not a great movie, but it's definitely the best of this batch. But let me know if you've seen any of these down below in the comments. Let me know if you'd now like to see any of these in the comments. Tell me that. I always like to hear which ones that you now want to go seek out because it got featured on the project. Tell me that down below. If you like what you see, hit that like button. If you enjoy the channel, subscribe to it and hit the bell to get notified about new videos. And check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines and help support this to keep it going. And yeah, we're going to see you on the next episode, which has definitely some bigger movies to be featured right here on the 80s Project.